Greetings, Mark Goering here, publisher of The Sun. And today we're going to talk about the Charter Commission, and with two Charter Commission members, Harrison Kanzler and Ray Levitt.
Hey. Yep.
Harrison, how
Thanks
you
for
guys
having
doing?
us. Great, how are you?
Good.
Yep.
Hey, can I have a minute just to kind of go over the history of the Charter?
Yep.
Sure.
So the Charter was created, this Charter Commission was created last year by an overwhelming vote, which was actually 1,245 to 247. And the Charter is really the establishing document of the whole town, right? And so back in 91 was the last time there was a serious effort to revise it, and it lost overwhelmingly at the polls. But it was really dramatic. It created 3 districts and also a 9-member council. And then in 1992, which really wasn't a change to the Charter, we went from 3 to 5 selectmen. And then, notoriously, in 1996, we went to SB2. So, but I did ask, I was wondering, like, okay, was there any revisions before 1991 or the early 90s? So I asked Bill Marvel, and he dug up this page from the old Reporter from 1980 with Keith Henney had written a letter, and Keith Henney, with the Henney Historical Room at the Conway Library. So it turns out apparently there were 4 original copies left. And there was one, it was a myth that one was found in the vault in Town Hall, which wasn't the case. But there's this thing called a regrant. And what happened was, like in the original founders of the town, that to be whatever with the common lands, you had to perform certain duties. Well, if you didn't, you got kind of thrown off. But then if you want to be reinstated, you had to reapply, and you got this thing called the regrant. And that apparently, which is more, and actually Keith Henney said it actually could be more rare than the original Charter. There's one hanging up in the Conway Historical Society. Do you know that?
I did not know that.
And I don't even know that either, so we have to take a field trip down there.
Yeah.
All right, so enough of the history lesson. So where do you want to start with the, by the way, I should say that I'm on the Charter Commission too. So where do you want to start with it? Do you want to start with what we tried to do and couldn't do? Why don't we do that, Ray? Why don't you do that?
Well, I think what we tried to do was to upgrade what we had. Obviously, if the Charter was done many millenniums ago, there was a lot of verbiage in there that needed to be updated, which we did. I think the general feeling of the town was that we've moved on, just by looking around, and that it was time to bring Conway in.
But we tried to, part of that, I think everybody thought, including me, is that we could get rid of the deliberative part. Right, Harrison? So we couldn't do that.
No.
Yeah.
And that stays.
Yeah.
I think the one way we could have done that was if we had gone to a city
council.
But I think that in the process of looking at what that means, we all said, no way.
Yeah.
Because if we had gone to city, I believe my understanding of it was the voters get 1 say, and that's who sits on the city council. And otherwise you lose all other voting rights when it comes to what happens in the city. And we said we're not going to try to get rid of SB2 that way. Like it didn't balance.
It wasn't worth it.
And
I think there was also a court case in Manchester 20 years ago, where the city of Manchester tried to bring the school department underneath the city control, and they couldn't.
Right. So I think that was some of the people's reaction too, was they thought they were going to be able to get control of the budgetary process of the school, and maybe that's why some people voted for it. But obviously, as you say, the Manchester decision proved that couldn't be done.
Right. So the weeds of this thing, and it's like a 36-page charter, is that and I say we, but it was the people who actually did it. Karen Umberger went through line by line. Give her credit for that, but we're all involved. It's that part of it's in the weeds that nobody's really going to see, but that's important because it brings up basically a 250-year-old document up to today's standards that meets the current state of RSAs and all that. But what people know about are the controversial parts.
Right.
So let's talk about those.
Sure.
Yep.
All right. Which one do you want to start with? How about the number of counselors?
I think that's
a good place to start. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sure. So one thing that we're looking to do with this charter update is go from 5 to 7. With the select board system, it's capped at 5. It cannot go any higher. So the town council allows it, I think, to go up to 15.
Correct, yeah.
But we said, no way, 7 sounds reasonable. I know for me, I like the idea of 7. I know that I was in support of it for a couple reasons. One, is something a bit more inclusive. I know the select board themselves said there was a few of them that said we don't think 7's necessary.
Right.
But I see that as being kind of relativistic. It's not necessary for you, obviously, because you're on the select board. But I think for a lot of other people, having, seeing a broader share of the workload, it makes sense and it could open it up for some new people. And I think we all said during conversations that we'd like to see some new faces up there. The other thing I see it too is the select board did tell us that they find the workload to be adequate with the number of people they have. But I think that therein is one of the problems, because I think that a lot of people in town see it as we want you to do more. So we would like you to have more people. I think a lot of people want to see a more proactive approach, and I think adding 2 people allows for them to take on more work and provide that proactivity. So to me, 7 is a good jump to make.
And what kind of things specifically, I mean, you've been involved with housing and all that.
Yep.
So where do you see that, and Ray, and after Harrison, too, where do you see that there is more work to be done?
Well, I'm not sure where Harrison would go with more work to be done, but I think had they had 7 members, so they could have like subcommittees, so like you could have 3, they're kind of restricted when they have quorums, you have to operate under certain regulations, whereas if they had a committee of 3, which wouldn't be a quorum, that maybe they could have done some stuff with like the parking regulations. They could have got out there and done, and it may have prevented a lot of the backlash that they got.
You're referring to the failed paid parking initiative.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that they might have been able to work that process a little better. I think they might have been even maybe used that process to help when they did their revaluation explanation. I think it would have, again, alleviated a lot of the backlash if they had like a subcommittee that could have met with people more often and not actually set up an
Well, some people might say just the current 5 selectmen should have been ahead of the curve a little bit instead of.
Well, yeah, and I guess hindsight's 20/20. You can look back and say, gee, they really messed up. But if you're sitting in that chair, at that given point in time, I think they were trying to do what was in the best interest of the town as they saw it. I just think that they did not see the uprising that was there. Whereas had you had the ability to have like subcommittees that could have gone out and met with different groups and stuff, it might have prevented a lot of that.
And Harrison, go ahead. But Ray, just to remind viewers, you were a selectman when?
So back in the late 80s, early 90s.
You're like 12?
Yeah, I wish. I was pretty young, but back then I was on the board with Cindy Briggs and Harvey Blake and myself. And then, we came along, Harvey got off and Nancy Allard came on, and that was when we voted to
you were on that board that went to 5?
That went to the 5, and part of it is like, you go into Shaw's or whatever and, met like somebody and it's like, oh, you got a meeting, so that was very.
One of your fellow selectmen.
Right, so that could it could become a problem with the growth of the valley or the town. Back in the day, nobody really thought much of it, but with the awareness of right to know laws and all that other stuff, it became an issue.
Harrison, do you have other specifics of why we need to? Because I know there were 2. I'm going to interrupt for 1 second though. There were, and within the commission, there were like 2 factions. Some people said about the work, that it could spread the work out more evenly or get more accomplished. And my take as the commission member was more like a better representation.
That's what I think too.
Because I mean, incumbents are great, and obviously they have the experience, but there's always the best boards probably have a balance between incumbents and some new people with new ideas.
Right.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, and I do see it bringing a balance of bringing on some new people. And like I said, part of that for me is that opening up, maybe spreading the workload so that there are some people who maybe didn't previously feel they were able to fulfill that role now would. I know that we'd been told you know, if you want to do it, you can make it work. But I don't think that's necessarily true for everyone, and that, you know, lowering that barrier to entry can help get some more people to be interested in take a role. And as far as the proactive work, kind of to the point you were saying, you know, a big thing for me is looking at things like the reevaluation that just happened. And you might know more. I honestly, I don't have time to watch every selectman meeting. I don't know necessarily everything that they say, but I just can't help but feel that what we're told, hey, commercial values have come down, residential values have come up. We've shifted the burden to residential to compensate for that, and that's why people's property taxes have gone up so much. So where is the 5-year economic plan being generated to make sure that commercial property values are going back up to try to shift that burden back over? Or where is the plan being developed to get, you know, to get some sort of alleviation effort, you know, for residential? And I know there's some stuff that's been happening at the state level, but what is the town doing, and what is the plan to, you know, we know when the next evaluation is coming. Right. So where's the plan to prepare for that and to get ready for that? And so I look at things like that and say that's why we need 7, is to make sure that we have enough people in the wings to make a subcommittee, to come up with a plan, to present it to the people, to move us forward. So that to me is, you know,
because it really is true, Ray. I mean, you know, because you were obviously on the board back then, but it used to be that the school was always controversial.
Okay.
And now it's the town.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's by some degree the town is just way more complicated than it was.
It is, but I think it's circumstances that have created, like the revaluation thing, and I don't see that changing a whole heck of a lot. In fact, I almost think that your commercial values are going to continue to go down, because brick and mortar buildings, as far as like all the outlets and stuff, you know, there's a move away from that, because
but we have hotels.
Yeah.
To replace them,
Yeah.
right?
But as part of COVID, people were coming here for the recreation, and, you know, also go shopping too. But I can know when I started my business, there were distinct seasons. Yeah. You know, you had your summer season, hunting season, and then ski season, and then mud season. Yeah. And nothing happened in mud season. You know, like we used to joke at Labor Day, you could take a can and set it up on Route 16 and fire it down and not hit anything.
Yeah,
you know, and now it's because of everything that's happened with recreational activities and stuff, and obviously shopping, which is kind of a recreational activity for some, that it's changed the valley.
Yeah. Well, I think we've convinced everybody that 7 members are good. Let's move on to the next controversial one.
The only thing I would bring up
okay,
on that is, and I said that in my letter, was that I was disappointed with the selectmen's coming out against that when we gave them ample opportunity during the process to at least come talk to us about that, and they chose not to do that. So I felt that they kind of did us a disservice, not saying, hey, this is a red line in the sand, don't cross it.
And I think that speaks to a larger point of why, because if you talk to the people who are against it, I mean, there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle. And so it's easy to pick out one that you don't like. And I think even though it was unanimous, and I have to, unanimous vote that we all support it, and I have to say the caveat of Dave Weathers, who's on the commission, but he really, his vote was just to put it in front of the people, just to make sure people understand that. He wasn't necessarily in favor of it. But it is true that, you know, it's easy to just pick out one. And I think we all had pieces that we didn't like, but as a group, we you know, it's like Congress, right? You don't like everything in it, any package. So, but the structure itself is what we're trying to communicate, is that that's just a structure for a new time. So another controversial thing, which I've heard as much as the 7 members, is the $2 million bonding authority. So Harrison, you want to start with that one?
Sure. I mean, I'm actually going to defer to something that Ray brought up at one of our meetings, which is that just look at the amount of infrastructure damage we've seen in the past few years from flooding that's been seemingly recurring, honestly, almost on a yearly basis now. We can sit around and wait for relief money, or we can have the ability to get something done and then reimburse ourselves.
And what is the $2 million, what is that authority?
What is the bonding authority?
Yeah, I mean, what is it specifically? How does
Sure.
it?
Okay. Yeah. So what the bonding authority does is it allows the town council with a supermajority, so 5 of 7 sitting members have to vote in approval of it. They can bond up to $2 million, and that does not have to go before the voters.
But there's a public hearing.
There is public hearing, yes. So the voters can turn out. They can say, we don't approve this, or we do approve this, and provide their insight and input on the decision, certainly. But it gives the town a bit of leeway and flexibility in getting things done. You know, I think we were at the town meeting, right, at the SB2 meeting, and how many of those things in there were things that were essentially going to be not necessarily bonding, but are getting built into the budget to pay for, and you know, how many of those things could have been taken care of already if they needed to be, right, in an emergent situation. And I think Tom Holmes always brought up the also kind of a town amenity piece. You know, if there's a piece of land the town wants to acquire for the benefit of the community, this is something that can happen more organically than if we have to rely on town meeting just once a year to be able to get something done. And if we're being honest, talking about inflation, talking about the current economy, $2 million is really not going to get super far.
Right.
Like it's in by current standards, that's not really enough, in my opinion, to raise an alarm or a flag about the potential for abuse or misuse, because it simply is not going to get you as far, I don't think, as you think it is.
Right.
And the other thing is, this is not new to towns. Other towns have it in their charters as well. And it's not like people run out and say, hey, I got $2 million, I'm going to go blow it.
Right.
You know, there was, when we were before the selectmen, and Carl Thibodeau, they were going back and forth with Tom Holmes, and Carl had made the comment about, you know, spending the money and frivolously or whatever, and Tom Holmes said that, well, it'd be at your peril, you know, as a selectman, which is sort of true, but the selectmen or councilmen are not going to do anything that the town manager isn't going to request.
Right.
And it would be their peril, you know, which is their occupation. So, you know, I guess from a standpoint of the, you know, spending willy-nilly, that's not the case. And you know, in my 45 plus years working in emergency services, you know, there have been some occasions over the last 10 or 15 years that's like, could have been catastrophic from a town standpoint. And one of the budget committee members said, well, we do have emergency ability to spend money, and you have to go, you know, before the budget committee to get that, but it has to be paid off in full within the next following.
Right.
So that's really going to affect your bottom line.
Absolutely.
You know. Whereas this, if it's bonded, it's over a period of time, 5 years or whatever.
And I think the classic example that we all bring up too is that Conway missed enlarging the town beach. We got the little
that
posters
was,
in the beach,
yeah.
and we couldn't. I mean, apparently this is, I didn't know before my time, I guess, but there was a big piece of land that was available, and we had to wait to town meeting, and someone else bought it.
Right.
So that was lost.
They didn't want to wait that long.
They didn't want to wait that long. And the other thing is, you know, and I feel like I'm one of you guys here. I'm not the interviewer, but which is okay.
Yeah.
You know, small town. But you know, I point out that like the school board always has a surplus in their budget, and so does the town. And that money's already been approved. And as Mike DiGregorio, the chair of the school board, points out, they could spend it, but they don't.
Yeah, right.
Because they're just responsible. And to think that you're going to have all of a sudden 5 people on a council that's going to spend it on fancy cars, it just ain't going to happen.
Right.
Oh, and the other piece to it is that as Tom Holmes is also former town manager who's on the commission. He says this, all it takes is a special article next year to reduce that or eliminate it.
Right.
Correct.
You could make amendments to the charter either by petition or, you know, by the councilman bringing it to the voters' attention. But yeah.
And I think that's a huge thing, because you mentioned this earlier, is, you know, there seems to be people who are picking out that one piece and saying, this I disagree with, I'm going to throw the whole thing out on this. And I think the important message that I would convey anyway in that instance is most of these changes can only happen through this whole process of the Charter Commission that we have done. But if this passes, any of these things can be changed simply by having them do a warrant article to remove that ability. So if the one thing you don't like is the bond, then get a bunch of people together, support this, get a bunch
25
of people,
people.
get
25
25 people
people.
together,
Yeah.
and you can have this on the ballot to take it away.
Right.
Yep.
And if it is truly a bad idea, then it gets taken out. But there's enough good in here that I feel like throwing it all away for the one thing you disagree with is a disservice to the community when you can get together and have it removed once we put it in place fairly easily. So
And we spent $10,000 of tax dollars
yeah.
doing this. And, you know, you're going to throw that out too. You know,
Well,
and then
the other part of that is that it's probably, if this gets shot down, there's not going to be a lot of people who are anxious to do it again.
no, oh
It'll
God,
be
no.
another generation.
Yeah.
It'll be another, last time was the 90s, and here we are 30 years later,
Yeah.
25 years later. So that's, okay, well, that's very good. So let's go over a couple of the other things that are less controversial. Where one thing, it consolidates the ballot a little bit. So can you speak to that?
Well, the nonprofits, so which historically, you know, you, like at the deliberative meeting, we get to the nonprofits and, you know, we lump them all together in a lump. And as a voting body, we all say, good. Well, what we're going to do through the charter, if it's approved, is allow the selectmen to put it in a group. So you just have, you know, instead of having like, what was it, 30 through
something
75
like 15
or whatever,
Yeah.
instead of having that big lump thing, it will be just one. It will
for
allow
ones
the-
that don't change.
Right.
If someone asks for an increase or new ones.
It has to be approved for 3 years running, and a voter approved for 3 years running without changing the amount, and then it can be
Right.
lumped in.
Yeah.
Right.
And then at the deliberative session, if the voters, you know, that are there at the deliberative session want to pull something out,
They can.
they could do that.
Right.
And it's also going to shorten the, I think it's going to group some of the capital reserves.
Correct. It'll lump them, same thing again, as long as it doesn't change, they'll all be in one, which again, historically, whether a deliberative or the voting thing have always passed.
And again, there's the ultimate check at deliberative that if there's something you know is in there that you don't want in there, the voters can pull it out.
Yeah.
You know, and I like to think with the casino coming, the requests from nonprofits will diminish.
Yeah, that may be
Well,
the
there you
case.
go. That's optimistic.
You know,
I
that
think
actually
the
may be the
nonprofits are
case.
going to want both.
Yeah, I do too.
But I do think, you know, I mean, Dave Weathers, his major concern, if I can use that word, was that he was voter apathy. And I think, and I'm not sure that a long ballot discourages people, but it's a pain,
It's
that's for
something,
sure.
Time consuming.
But I do think the 7 counselors increases voter interest because you're just going to have more people involved. They're going to have their own constituents and so forth. All right, so another piece is electing the ZBA members.
Yes.
What was the rationale behind that?
That wasn't really my thing. It was one of those things I'll go along with the group. I think they thought that it just, again, gave more community representation to the board. I think there might have been a fairly good argument to keep it appointed because of the expertise that appointed gets. But there again, should this election thing not work out the way that the group thinks, you can petition to have that change.
That can change. Yep.
Yeah, and it's reducing the budget committee from
17
to
13.
13,
Yeah.
correct.
And what was the idea behind
over a
that?
3 or 4 year
Over
time
3, yeah.
period? Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I think some of the rationale there was they have a really hard time filling those seats, and I don't think it serves the community well to have a walk-on boards. You know, it's not appointed, and it's almost not even elected when you have that many seats, because there can be someone who, you know, is largely voted out of another position, can walk on to that position, and when there's not a contested run, you can't then also really vote them out. You would have to put yourself forward to run against them and hope there's enough people that it becomes a contested race. And so I think this was a bit of housekeeping. I think that it was mixed. I feel like it was a mixed feedback from the budget committee. I think there were a fair amount of them who were in favor of reducing the number of seats.
Well, I think the fact is you just look at, you know, like this year there was like 14.
Yeah, right.
And then I'm not sure, but aren't there open seats this year
Yeah.
when they came to sign up? So
Yeah,
And I think
there you
there's two of them are precinct seats
go.
that
They're going away anyway.
Yeah.
that would
Yeah.
be going away.
So we only have like 5 minutes left.
Yep.
Before we kind of wrap up this whole thing, what other specific things you guys can think of that viewers should know about that are high on the list? That was on my list.
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is just an overall picture. We could have done so much more, to your point of what they did in 1991, right? I mean, we could have we tried to keep it as close to the system we currently have as we possibly could, and really worked on, to your point earlier, Ray, really worked on making just a system that is as seamless as it can be while giving us a nice runway moving forward, because we can make more changes from here if the voters want to and if they approve it. There's nothing, we checked with the lawyers, there's nothing that the council can do to basically empower themselves. All power has to come from the voting bloc. But it gives us opportunity moving forward, whereas with the selectmen system we're at now, we've pretty much capped it out. There's not a whole lot we can do to change things where we are. We can update the language and do things like that, but we have the ability to move forward with this should we need it. And that, to me, is a huge piece of this. It's going to be a minimal change for all of us now, but to your point, 5 years, 10 years down the road, if people want to see change, they don't have to go through this entire process to make it happen. They can just do a warrant article. They can make a few changes here and there, and they have the ability to do it without going through this expensive and lengthy process for the community.
Now, Ray, you were an early skeptic of it, but now you're a convert, right?
You know, Steve Porter caught it a little bit for saying he's a small town guy, and I kind of am too. I still drive around in the car that I had when I was in high school.
Wow.
You know, and still got my first wife. You know, that's kind of a novelty. You know, when I went into it, it's like, yeah, I don't see us changing a whole heck of a lot. But then the more you got into it and listened to, like, you know, Harrison and Eliza and some of the younger people, it's like, yeah, you know, we got to bring this thing up to the 20th century. You know, living in the past doesn't necessarily work. And as far as the $2 billion thing, it's one of those cases. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Absolutely.
So when you look at the big picture, I think, and stop and think too. We had 4 ex-members of the selectmen.
I was going to say, I just wanted
we had and a town manager on this committee.
Right.
You know, so there's a lot of history there, and an experience.
Yeah.
So for us to come, I thought it was one of the better committees I've ever worked on.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of give and take. We didn't always agree, but we came to consensus, and I think it came out with a really good.
I mean, it really was just, we should mention the commissioners. It really was, except for me and the minor leaguer, but it really was like an all-star cast, right? We had Tom Holmes, former town manager, sitting next to him with Dave Weathers, selectman for 22 years, Stacy Sands, selectman, Karen Umberger, selectman and state rep.
State rep.
Then you,
Me. Yep.
and then Eliza Grant, planning
Which I think
board.
is a young star in the town. I mean,
Yeah.
she's pretty sharp.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
And then me, and then Victoria Blake Knoll, and then you. Right, that's all. So that's a pretty good list, and we got along, and certainly a lot better than the school board does on Monday nights. But and the last thing, anything else? We got 1 minute to go. I did want to point out this takes a 60% passage, so
Right.
it's not a piece of cake.
No,
Right.
no,
Right.
and it's was it April 9th, the voting day. So I guess we will be. Some of us will be there if they want to ask questions as you come in. And we're not going to go, you know, drag a hold of you and say vote for this. But if there are some questions, there will be somebody representing the charter there during the day to answer those questions. And some of us will be around town to go to different.
Great.
Community
Okay,
events.
Ray, thank you very much. Harrison, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you.
Ray, good to see you.
And
All right.
hopefully we won't have to work on another committee for a while.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.